Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kim Ramsey. Thank you for joining the Norristown Chamber of Commerce and our second Legal Essentials member series. I appreciate everybody being here today. Our topic is the COVID related relief programs for entrepreneurs and businesses. And given the timing of the new announcement that came out, it's just perfect that we're here today with our guest speaker, Lou. I'm Kim Ramsey, the president and founder of the Norristown Chamber of Commerce. I also am the owner of Rick and Kim LLC, which is an educational company for the past 20 years. And I most recently started another company called Go Ground Express at the end of 2019 with Amazon, in partnership with Amazon. So this is really near and dear to my heart, and I hope you all find it just as beneficial. I'm also appreciative to Nigel Pyle from Pyle Law Firm and the Montgomery Bar Association and Nigo is an active member of the chamber, so I appreciate that. He has actually orchestrated our partnership in bringing this series to the Norristown Chamber of Commerce and our members, so thank you. He will provide a few housekeeping items and then we'll introduce our speaker for the day. As I said, I appreciate the time that Lou is giving us. Finally, afterwards, I invite you all to join the chamber, the Norristown Chamber of Commerce. If you're not already a member, we are a body of collected members of businesses, nonprofits, community leaders, and budding entrepreneurs, as well as veterans. And our shared focus and vision is really about partnership, collaboration, sharing of information and resources. And we are really focused on if businesses are strong and our community is strong, then we are all successful together. And none of this is more pertinent now than what has happened with COVID. So it is bringing us together so that we share these resources so that we continue now to either survive, restore, recover, and start anew. So please join us in this effort. You'll find many resources like this on the Norristown Chamber website, other resources that we bring. We used to be in person, and that's where I actually met Nigo at one of our mixers. But now that we have Zoom, we're actually having the ability to bring people from far and wide. And actually, it has been a benefit to the chamber. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Nigo. And again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you all for attending today. I just want to, before I introduce Lou, as Kim mentioned, my name is Nigel Pyle. I'm an attorney here in Pennsylvania. My focus is estate planning, elder law. I'm a member of the Montgomery Bar Association and the Chamber of Commerce in Norristown. The Bar Association has been doing a lot of these programs, and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion subcommittee of the Bar Associations is proud to put this event on with the Chamber of Commerce. I just want to talk a little bit about some housekeeping. So if everyone can mute their line, this will help Lou in his presentation, so there's little to no feedback coming in. We are going to leave questions for the end of the program. So if you have a question, if you can just type your question into the chat box, I will collect the question and make sure that we present that to Lou so that he can respond accordingly. And obviously, if at the end of the presentation, if anyone has questions that they want to ask Lou specifically, feel free to do so, and Lou will respond in kind. So I'd like to just introduce our speaker today. Louis Hutt, better known as Lou, is the CEO of the Hutt Company, Certified Public Accountants, LLC, and the Hutt Law Firm. Lou established the Hutt Company and the Hutt Law Firm over 25 years ago. Lou provides financial management and advisory services to individuals and enterprises. He specializes in regulatory and tax compliance, financial oversight and risk management, and strategic financing alternatives. Lou is recognized as an innovator in business, accounting, and law. Lou's contributions have been recognized by Washington University's Allen School of Business, who named Lou its Distinguished Alumni of the Year, and the U.S. Small Business Administration, who named Lou as an Accounting Advocate of the Year. Lou brings his vibrant energy and unique insight into financial planning to a national audience on the Lou Hutt Show, airing weekly on SiriusXM Radio. Lou authored The Road to Mega Success, Simple Strategies for Enriching the Bottom Line, which is lauded as a go-to guide for best practices in financial leadership. His book is now in its third edition. Lou has been invited to give on-air business and tax expertise on various media outlets. Before launching his own firm at the age of 28, Lou completed a legal clerkship with the Honorable Robert Bell, retired Chief Justice of the Maryland State Court of Appeals. He worked as a senior auditor at Ernst & Young and lectured at Morgan State University as the Ernst & Young Visiting Professor of Accounting. As a graduate of the Allen Business School of Washington University in St. Louis and the University of Maryland School of Law, Lou is a pioneer for diversity and representation in finance and accounting. Lou is motivated by his wife of 41 years, Nellie, their 3 children, and their 2 granddaughters. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the one and only, the magnificent, the dynamic Lou Hutt.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Nigo. I really, really appreciate that warm welcome and the introduction. Also, many thanks to the host sponsors of this event, Montgomery Bar Association and the Norristown Chamber of Commerce. I really applaud you for setting aside this time to discuss this important matter as it relates to financing programs, particularly relief programs for entrepreneurs and other entities such as nonprofits. So I wanted to drop in today to just share some insights. And frankly, this is a practical conversation as I would like it to be, not necessarily a conversation that will be wedded in legislative references and so forth. But I want this to really be a discussion which allows many of you who are participating to be able to evaluate your eligibility to participate and apply for the so-called PPP or the Payroll Protection Program loan. So what I'd like to do is start off initially and just share with you some fundamental thoughts, because I think small companies in particular have a unique operating culture. And what we've seen over the last year or so, that really large companies share the same sensitivity when we start to talk about cash. In small business circles, we would typically say cash is king. And the assumption would be, yeah, especially for small business, but not really for large business. But yet what we've seen over the last year is that even large business going through COVID and having to reduce their staff due to a drop in revenue, having to comply with orders that have reduced their operating parameters, that they too can struggle when it comes to cash. So what we recognize is, whether we're talking about large or small business, that cash is really the lifeline to our survival. It's the only way that business can blossom and incubate. So that's the one area that is critical and is essential and is common whether you're a large or a small business. The other element that I think is critical, and those of you that operate a small business in particular can identify, profitability is essential. Yes, profitability. And in the long term, if our companies are not profitable, meaning if we're not generating revenue in excess of expenses, we'll always have cash flow problems. COVID-19 has taken the industry, and I say industry meaning all businesses, to the brink. Whether it's due to the shutdown that was temporary in nature, or whether it's due to a fall off in customer demand, even if it's temporary, it's taken us to the brink. And cash is simply a priority as we move forward. Slide 2, please. As many of you know, there are some, and there have been some relief financing options that have been put on the table. The relief programs have really addressed two areas. One was short-term financing, and the other was long-term financing. I sort of think about whether we're talking about the Payroll Protection Program or at one point the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. I envision it to keep it simple so that I can work through it strategically, whether it's for my company or for other clients. I think of it like a three-legged stool. Yes. The first two legs relate to the Payroll Protection Program, and the third leg, which unfortunately has expired, was the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Now, once again, I said it's a stool, it's got some stability, and frankly, it's been a lifesaver for many companies. The first round of this Payroll Protection Program, as you recall, hit the blocks back in April of 2020. Around the same time, this Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program was also featured. Now, from a financial standpoint, again, the difference between these two is one was really focused on short-term financing. It's to keep staff on payroll, to keep businesses functional in the short term. That's the Payroll Protection Program. The other, which is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, was more for long-term financing. And I'll tell you how I got to that point in just a second or two. But the key thing to keep in mind as we talk about these programs is the maximum funding that is available. And that's very important. For those who apply for the Payroll Protection Program, if you're a first-time applicant, the ceiling is $10 million. If you are a second-time applicant, so you went through the program the first go-round and finances, your financial circumstances dictate that you need additional round of financing, that limit is $2 million. So first-time applicant, 10 million, second-time applicant, 2 million. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which was the third leg on that stool, unfortunately, the funding for that dried up and expired as of December 2020. In that program, the maximum financing was $2 million. Now, let me work backward. That Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, what was appealing about that program is that the payback period was 30 years. Oh yeah, it was very attractive from the standpoint of interest rate, about 3.5%, repayment period of up to 30 years. It was essentially like a mortgage. Now, the Payroll Protection Program is slightly different, and there's some stipulations. But the most important thing I want to lead with as it relates to the Payroll Protection Program, those of you that are participating, is to keep in mind that this funding dries up as of March 31st. So we're really dealing in about a 30-day window for anyone that is in need of additional short-term financing to apply through your bank, which in turn is the intermediary for the Small Business Administration, but to apply through your bank for financing. Now, we've had a major development in the last 5 days. President Biden and the new administration has restricted the acceptance of applications for the next 14 days to those businesses with 20 or less than 20 employees. That was a significant problem in the first tranche and the second tranche of this financing. When it was rolled out, unfortunately, those who had existing banking relationships, had connections with bankers, had lawyers and CPAs like those that organized this event and yours truly, managed to tap into the financing early on and got funding. Those who did not have existing banking relationships found themselves going from place to place, bank to bank, finance company to finance company in search for an institution that would process their application. Well, a lot of folks, very deserving businesses, small businesses, who one could argue needed more of the funding and support than the large businesses, were left out of the process. So this recent announcement by President Biden and his administration to restrict the acceptance of applications over the next 14 days to businesses under 20 employees is very significant. This is a game changer. There's another piece of revised regulation, which is a game changer. And I want to make certain that you're aware of this. In the first rollout of this program, it was, again, based primarily on payroll. So those businesses that could document payroll expenses for the calendar year of 2019 were primed to get financing through this payroll protection program, because in theory, the focus and the impetus is to help businesses retain employees, keep folks on payroll. Well, let's just think about it. What if you were an independent contractor, a freelancer, self-employed individual? Well, that category was wedded to an approach of calculating their need based on net income. Now, big difference between net income for an independent contractor, freelancer, versus what businesses that have employees use as their criteria. In many cases, the freelancer, the independent contractor, after deducting expenses, could have a bottom line, depending upon the tax year, whether it's 2019, 18, or 20, that could sway from hypothetically $100,000 to $15,000. Well, in this new announcement, the calculus for independent contractors and freelancers is going to be based on the top line rather than the bottom line. My understanding is SBA is still working out, and we checked this morning, still working out how it will ultimately flow through from a paperwork standpoint. But it is just important at this point to recognize that when you reach out to your bank, you can reach out to your bank, whether or not you are an independent contractor, freelancer, just as you could if you were a business with employees. Now, let me take a minute and go back to businesses with employees, because the math in determining what your financing or your funding level is, in theory, is pretty simple. You take the year of 2019, you add up all of your payroll and payroll-related expenses, and you divide by 12. That gives you an average monthly payroll amount. For purposes of computing your funding limit, that average monthly payroll related expense number is multiplied by 2.5. So in essence, through the Payroll Protection Program, you're provided with a lifeline that could give you roughly about 8 to 10 weeks worth of operating money. Now, if we look at that provision, again, math is fairly simple. Documentation is a little more challenging depending upon how your business operates. If you're a company, and you were a company, and you're a company now that utilizes a payroll service, for example, it's pretty easy to get those numbers. The other way to do it, frankly, is to use the quarterly payroll tax returns, which are the 941s that we all file on a quarterly basis. So two steps that we got to take to prepare you to submit a request for funding through the Payroll Protection Program. Number one, we've got to look at the books and calculate what the average monthly payroll expense is. Yes, that's the first step. We got to, in part of that first step, we got to calculate 2.5. That becomes the funding limit. Then the second level, of course, is we've got to be prepared to provide documentation. And that is very important because what I'm going to talk about shortly is what's known as the loan forgiveness part of this program. Yes, these are dollars that will be made available to you, but there are some stipulations. So let me take a moment or two just to talk about those stipulations, because there's always been a lot of conversation. Are these monies that we receive, are these grants or are these loans? Well, let's think about them as quasi loans. Now I say quasi because one condition and one opportunity, let's call it an opportunity that's available, is that you can have this loan or this funding treated as a grant if you meet certain criteria. Otherwise, it's a loan, and to be candid with you, even if it's a loan, it's the greatest deal we're probably going to encounter in a lifetime. Where am I coming from? Even if it's a loan, it's repayable over a 5-year period at 1% interest. Ladies and gentlemen, this is, and I often say there are no free lunches. I'm not going to call this free, but this is probably the best gift that any business person could receive. It is in essence a signature loan at 1%, repayable over 5 years. 10-month deferral period, meaning from the time that you receive the dollars, the loan repayment doesn't start for 10 months. So in the worst case scenario, if you elected not to pursue loan forgiveness, you've got the best loan conditions and terms that anyone could hope for. Now, let me talk about the loan forgiveness, because my own view is that it's in your best interest. And let's understand, it's not a gimme per se, because the hope is that you are, as a business, you're remaining viable. As a business, you're continuing to employ your team, your staff. Also, as a business, as you go through this tough period, this COVID era, that you're tweaking your business model so that you can move forward in the future, regain your footing, and prosper going forward. That's the hope. That's the mission. But loan forgiveness, well, essentially, there's a criteria. And let's just say that it's You apply and you receive $10,000. Well, the criteria is that 60% of that funding will go to payroll and payroll-related expenses. As a matter of fact, even under the new regulations, the payroll and payroll-related expenses, the balance of the 40% can go to such things as mortgage, rent, utilities. But also under the new regulations, it goes to things like worker protection expenditures. So there's broadening of the kinds of costs that will meet the criteria. 60% going to payroll, 40% going to this other category that we'll call allowable operating expenses. Now, there is a liberal, if you will, period of time in which you can elect to document that you've met this criteria. You can elect to demonstrate that you've met that criteria in 8 weeks or 24 weeks. You have the choice. So if we look at this from a mechanical standpoint, we not only want to apply and of course have the documentation that we need in order to substantiate the level of funding, but that same data is going to be critical once you're approved and later you attempt to document for purposes of loan forgiveness how those dollars were expended. It's a great opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to breathe life into your business, and I believe most businesses will be able to meet that criteria. Occasionally people ask the question, how soon must I apply for loan forgiveness? Well, going back to the earlier thought about a loan, if you choose not to apply for forgiveness, I mentioned that you had a 10-month deferral period. So that means if you don't apply for forgiveness within 10 months of receiving the dollars, then the government is going to look and treat it as a loan. So I'm encouraging small businesses, freelancers, independent contractors to prepare yourself. Once you receive the dollars, prepare yourself immediately to address the criteria necessary for loan forgiveness. Now, there is a special provision, and I give Congress some credit for not only developing and approving and expediting this legislation, but also for looking critically at the capabilities of, I'll say, smaller or micro businesses. So from a standpoint of loan forgiveness, there will be a self-certification process available to those who borrow less than $150,000. However, I want to be careful, and I want to make sure that I emphasize something. The Department of Justice takes the application of those who apply for this program and present information that represents their eligibility. They take this process very seriously. There have been flagrant cases of fraud and misuse. Now, I don't think that that's widespread, but there's certainly been cases. And the Department of Justice has gone after these individuals very aggressively. You know, there's been reports of folks, for example, purchasing a Lamborghini, jewelry, etc. So what I'm encouraging you to do is to make certain that you, as you apply for the loan funding and then you apply for forgiveness, I want to encourage you and stress the importance of making sure that your documentation is in order. Second major point that has come up And I want to share with you, because some folks have said, well, Lou, what if I took a draw the first time? And I did this back in June, July of 2020. And I realized I'm still not on stable footing. I still need additional help. Am I able to apply a second time? The answer is resoundingly yes. You can apply for a second draw. Now, if you apply for a second draw, there are a few changes that you need to bear in mind. Number one, the criteria for eligibility the second time around is tied to revenues. Yes, and the way it works is we have to compare the revenues that were generated by your business in the first 3 quarters of calendar year 2019 to the same quarters in 2020. If there's a reduction in any of those quarters, those 3-month periods, if there's a reduction of more than 25%, then you can apply for a second round of funding. Now, keep this in mind. I'll go back to something I've said earlier in my comments. There is an end date. There's a close expiration date. That date is March 31. So we've got 30 days to get in the pipeline, whether it's your first time around or your second time around. But I want to again stress to you, very important to act and to act expeditiously. Let me turn my attention to bottom line tax considerations. Here's the good news, and I think most of you will be happy to hear. There are no bottom line tax considerations. A lot of times people ask, well, Lou, wait a minute, are the proceeds from this program, Payroll Protection program, are they taxable? The answer is no. Because generally speaking, proceeds that you receive from any financing are not subject to tax. Now, the repayment is non-deductible. So it goes both ways. Then folks say, well, wait a minute. Isn't it true under tax law, whenever there is debt forgiveness, that the debt forgiveness is subject to taxation? Well, thank goodness, even out of the blocks, Congress stipulated that there would be no taxation on the forgiveness of debt associated with the Payroll Protection program. However, the Internal Revenue Service took a different position. The Internal Revenue Service said, hey, listen, and this was latter part of 2020 when this was really up in the air. The Internal Revenue Service decided, well, if you use expenses, all the expenses that you use to qualify for forgiveness are not allowable as tax deductions. Well, we sit on that. Practitioners like me were appalled. Unfortunately, the same message got through to members of Congress, and through legislation, they passed provisions which have basically dictated that any expenses that are used to substantiate forgiveness are still treated as tax-deductible expenses. So good news is there are no adverse financial tax consequences associated with applying, receiving your funding, or applying and receiving debt forgiveness. Speaking of forgiveness, I should point out to you, as of a week ago, the SBA is not accepting loan forgiveness applications from their intermediaries, meaning the banks. March 12th, they're going to resume the acceptance of those forgiveness applications. So if you're someone that applied for forgiveness and you've been wondering, why haven't I received a notice right away? It is due to the logjam at the Small Business Administration, but that should not delay or hamper you from working with your bank to submit that application. Now, just before we open this up for some questions and answers, I want to take a second or two, next slide, please, and talk about cash flow management during uncertain economic times and give you just 5 parting thoughts on this subject. First, and I think this is intuitive, in uncertain economic times, it is critical to spend wisely. Now, many of my clients are small entrepreneurs, and it is hard to wear 12 hats. And sometimes the hat that gets the least attention or gets worn the fewest times is the hat that deals with financial management on a day-to-day basis. There's a tendency to delegate that responsibility and not really be intricately involved. Well, during this COVID era, it is critical that you're front and center in the approval, in the decision related to which expense is paid and when. Yes, the tracking and the timing of cash outlays becomes essential. Strategically speaking, while you're in this era, I would encourage you to look at strategies for accelerating the collection of cash and deferring the payment of expenses. Now, I didn't say violate terms of your credit terms and conditions, but your payments, at least from the standpoint of preserving cash, should be synchronized in such a way where you pay just as needed. So if you have 30 days to pay, you're probably going to be looking at paying on that 26th day, not on the 10th day or the 8th day. Again, very important. Second thought is guard customer credit. And we're all in this environment. For those of us that are heavily dependent on a major client or two, or even smaller clients, it never hurts to reassess their ability to pay before you deliver product or service that is significant and could have a negative impact on your business if that invoice is not paid on a timely basis. So some of us may need to go back and reassess the credit standing of our customers and our clients. Very, very important. Thirdly, it never hurts to establish a line of credit. I had this conversation just a week or two ago with a client, and their response to me was, well, Lou, listen, I've got enough cash to cover me 30 days. I've got enough cash to take care of this matter or that matter. And I said, well, the key is, even with the Payroll Protection Program and the funding that you get through that, apply for a line of credit now before you need it. What we typically think about in terms of a line of credit is a short-term credit facility, which we can draw from in the event that there's a cash shortfall 1 month, but the recovery is predictable 3 to 4 months down the road. If you see that you could have that sort of fluctuation on a short-term basis, this is a perfect time to apply for a line of credit, given the fact that deal flow among most banks has really dropped off a little bit because so many people, again, are in kind of a hold or an indecision mode for the time being as they await this COVID-19 era to be resolved. Also, manage growth. Manage growth. Now, that may shock you that in this COVID era, I would be discussing the need to manage growth. Well, the one thing that many of us have experienced is that customer demand is anemic. I mean, people were sort of in shock financially, and understandably so, with school closings and companies reducing staff and reductions in air travel. All of these things have shocked the way that consumers behave. So you have, for example, restaurants in desperate need of customers, even at a lower capacity. But then you have bicycle shops that can't keep up with demand. Managing growth during this period is essential because if growth gets out of control, in other words, if we have a surge of growth and it's not managed, that could deplete our cash. The recommendation I always say and the guidelines I present to business owners is never grow beyond your financing or operating capacity. Growth management. Lastly, vendor relationships. Vendor relationships, those that you depend on to supply you with product, ingredients that you use. Be in close communication with them. If ever you find yourself in a difficult financial situation, my word of advice here is talk to your vendors. If you can't make the terms, let them know where you stand and when you expect to be able to fulfill your financial obligation. And if things get very difficult, see if you can work through a longer payment plan. But the bottom line is relationships matter. They're a big deal. And God willing, when this COVID situation resolves itself, those are the very people that we're going to need to go back to do business. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that some of these thoughts, some of these comments have been helpful, and I want to pause at this point and entertain any questions.
Lou, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. I was taking a lot of notes. I know you touched on a lot of areas over there, some information that I did not know before. And I recognize that many of the people that were listening today may have received some wonderful nuggets of information. I do have, I want to start off with one question, then I'll open it up to the audience.
Yes.
For businesses that may have started in 2020, and they may not have the financials to compare their 2020 performance to their 2019 performance, are they able to apply for PPP loan money in this second round?
The answer to that, Nico, is yes. We had some discussion, as a matter of fact, in my office about why would you lean toward using 2019 information as opposed to 2020? And when we think about it, 2020 is probably when if we use that as a base, and then when we were talking earlier about the PPP and calculating the funding amount, and I said you take an average payroll, well, chances are, at least for some businesses, their payroll in 2019 would have been higher than 2020, if no more than the fact that there may have been 30 or 60 days in which their business was operating at half capacity. So the answer is yes, you can use 220 as your baseline, although I would strongly recommend that you compare any amount from a funding standpoint to what it would be if you used 2019. Those that are new, clearly, as you point out, it's going to be a 2020 type of assessment. The other point that I should probably make, and I may not have been quite as clear on this one, is we do need to pay close attention to the news and journals, and obviously your professional advisors over the next few days, because we do expect SBA to come out with a calculus for independent contractors, freelancers, those folks that are not, do not carry a payroll. So want to make that point as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Lou. Kim, I see you have a question. Did you want to ask Lou that question?
Yes, I'm actually asking on a few small businesses who've asked me some of these questions. First, I was asking about the line of credit. I have tried to share my experience with having a line of credit prior to the COVID or the pandemic happening, and how it has supported and been my lifeline. And I tried to tell people why it's important. And now more so, as you mentioned, it's also important. I don't know necessarily that many have done that, particularly very small businesses, because you have to apply with your credit and all that. But now that you've mentioned it, are there banks still willing to do the line of credit because they're so bombarded with the protection, the PPP loans and all that? And do you find there's a specific type of bank, like a community funding bank or a community bank, that are more, as I say, business friendly or small business friendly to apply to approving those type of loans?
That's a great question, Kim. A lot is driven in terms of establishing a line of credit. A lot is driven by financial information. I mentioned earlier in my comments about small business and freelancers, understandably having to wear 12 hats. And sometimes the financial part of the business gets the least amount of attention. I'd like to turn that table. I'd like to recommend that owners prioritize financial reporting. Now, this gives me the opportunity to make a distinction. Having a software package is a tool, but it's not a solution as it relates to financial reporting. What enhances a company's ability to apply and receive approval for a line of credit is the quality of their financial information. There are two things that go into determining whether a business is granted a line of credit. And if bankers are honest, they'll tell you this. Part of it is science and part of it is art. The art is subjective. It's how comfortable are you with this borrower? What are the signs or circumstances that tell you that this borrower would be able to manage its way through this, this anemic period financially? Well, most bankers look to, well, what kind of mechanisms do you have to report your finances? Who are you working with to minimize your income taxes? From a strategic standpoint, what's your game plan? What's your A plan? What's your B plan? What's your C plan? And of course, during this period, we need to probably have all three of those. So yes, I think it should be prioritized. Remember, banks, their core business is lending. That's their core business. So even while many are certainly immersed in processing PPP loans, they're also using the PPP as a time to develop long-lasting business relationships. Oh, yes. So this is a time to establish familiarity. This is the time where you can say, hey, I'd like to talk about my business. When can we Zoom call so we can talk about this? And I'm happy to share with you information. Now, to do that, many companies are going to need, it sounds self-serving. You're going to need a CPA. You're going to need a business attorney. You're going to need a contract attorney. Sometimes, frankly, if you're dealing with, and we're looking at this situation holistically, you need an estate attorney. In other words, all of these are considerations that a banker makes in determining whether or not to grant a line of credit. So I hope that small businesses in particular will take this as an opportunity to create a stronger financial foundation. Get the PPP, which, as I say, I never thought I'd see this in a lifetime. I mean, the biggest challenge for many companies, particularly small companies, when they go to a bank in the conventional way, is what's your collateral? And the business owner would typically say, well, my sweat equity. I mean, it's what I'm doing. I mean, I don't have equipment. I don't have an account with stock and securities in it. I don't have those kind of things as collateral. Well, the PPP is the one opportunity, probably in a lifetime, where many of us can go up and be approved for what amounts to a signature-only loan with no collateral. Hope I did justice to your question, Kim.
Great.
Anyone
Thanks.
else?
So Lou, so we talked, a lot about for-profit companies and entrepreneurs. What about nonprofits? Are they able to take advantage of this PPP money?
Wow. Again, another wonderful question and an opportunity to encourage nonprofit organizations. Here in my office, we work with a major church who applied for the Payroll Protection Program. Religious organizations and other nonprofits tend to be a little reluctant, if you will. But you too, as a community of organizations, provide a valuable economic base to the community. Religious organizations, nonprofits, not only do they serve the community, but they employ workers. And thank goodness they were included. So we would go through the same mechanism, the same process that I described earlier. We take a look at payroll expenses, which is what we did in the case of this religious organization. Over a 12-month period, we come up with the average payroll-related expenses. That number times 2.5. And it was really a shot in the arm. It was like an adrenaline shot for this particular church organization. And Nigo, I got to figure that there are many other organizations who should or could explore. As a matter of fact, locally here, and Kim, you can relate to this. I was talking with the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and he mentioned that the chamber can apply for the PPP. So whether it's a religious organization, whether it's another type of tax-exempt organization, if you've experienced any kind of cutback in your funding and contributions and donations, this PPP may be a lifeline.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Any other questions from the audience? While we're waiting to see if there's any other questions, Lou. Oh, go ahead.
Hey Lou, how you doing? Thank you for being here. Honestly, very insightful information. You know, I go back and I think about reach one, teach one. I'm a young
Yes.
entrepreneur. I have, a few arms of businesses that were affected due to COVID.
Yes.
During the first PPP round, I was ill-informed about us being eligible as a small business.
Mm, mm,
My accountant had told us that we weren't eligible, and in doing so, we missed out on the first round of PPP.
mm.
Now that the government's opened up the second round, I did go ahead and apply for it. We were granted a little bit of a financing, but
Fantastic.
I was questioning because of the wording. It was an SBA PPP loan. So I
Mm.
don't know if it was a small business loan or if it was a PPP loan. So I just want to know if you can touch on that a little bit, if you're familiar with the wording of that. I got it from TD Bank. That was the bank that I had applied to.
Great, great. Jamal, is that Jamel?
Jamel.
Jamel. Jamel, actually, this funding is processed through the Small Business Administration, but the Small Business Administration utilizes banks as intermediaries. So when you get that wording that basically it's a SBA PPP or a PPP SBA loan, it's just recognizing that the agency and government that is responsible for the administration of this program is the Small Business Administration. And it's interesting that we talked about, this money being treated as a loan. Well, the intermediaries that will be responsible for servicing the loans, if in fact you don't apply for forgiveness, will be the banks. So if you went through TD Bank will be the bank if you do not apply for forgiveness, which Jamel, I know you are going to apply for forgiveness. But if you were not, then that would be that would in essence be like a mortgage company.
Okay.
Okay. But I'm happy to hear that you were able to get some clarification that you discovered you were eligible and that you applied. And depending on your circumstances, remember that you may be in a position where you can go for a second round, but you've got to do it before March 31st.
Thank you. Because the final paperwork that's needed, the last bit of signatures, I was working on that today, but I was waiting to have this conference call with you guys before I did so. Obviously, I'm going to have a consultation with my accountant as well, but I just wanted to have a different perspective and another layer of information. So I want to say thank you to everyone who put this together because it was definitely insightful. Thank you.
Great. Appreciate your participation.
Yeah, great question, Jamel. Thank you, Lou. Any other questions?
Hi, it's Colleen. I posted a question in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see it there. And Lou, thank you so much for the opportunity. I did definitely learn some new information. I did apply for the first round last year. In applying for the second round, though, I posted a question about grant funding from 2020. And I had gotten mixed information that the grant funding was through CARES, and it's considered, it needs to be considered in our gross receipts when we're calculating the 25% loss of revenue. Is that correct?
That's a great question. Now, that's one that I'm going to leave as a matter of fact, I think my information is posted there for you. Let me look at that one. That's an interesting question. And what it raises is the point that this program, starting from April of last year, was rolled out so rapidly that some of these questions had not, and still to this day have not been clearly addressed. But I'm happy to take a look at that particular question. And the grant proceeds that were involved here were local or state?
Right, county, and some were state. And so my business is Precious Life Learning Center. And so we received funding for childcare, for mostly PPE, a lot of that, and just for operating expenses. And so when you look at the numbers and the grant funding, we're absolutely thankful to have it. And it definitely kept us afloat during this time, but it seems to be working against us at this point for second round PPP funding. And so when I crunch the numbers, and I do have a bookkeeper, I do have an accountant, we're coming out 0.9% below the cutoff for second.
Oh my goodness.
And so when
That's-
I spoke with I know it's killing me. So when I spoke to my credit union, I said, how strict is it? Is there any kind of like gray area? And my
right.
lending officer was like, no, we've asked about that. He said, if you don't hit that number, we're advising you, not to apply. And so it keeps circling around in my head. I just want to kind of get a definite answer, because it seems that no one can really say 100% this is.
I have a thought for you. Your congressperson may be of assistance on something like this. I mean, 0.9% off. Many in Congress feel very strongly that there should be some flexibility built into the regulations. I personally have talked with Senator Ben Cardin, and I know he in particular is one that has an open ear to the kind of circumstances that you're talking about, where, if it's a razor thin difference between your eligibility and ineligibility. So, Colleen, I would give some thought. And then, of course, as I said, I'll follow up on my end to see if I can identify any guidance that would help you through this process. But if nothing else, we need to put that on the table for consideration, just in case. Even if this is not resolved, the next, well, let's hope we don't have to have a next round, but if there is a next round, that can be taken into account.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Colleen. Michael Breslin, you have a question you want to ask Lou?
The same question as Colleen, but just PPP proceeds from the first go round. Does that count in the gross proceeds?
No. And and presumably what's happening, Michael, is when you take a look at your financial history, the proceeds from that first PPP are being treated initially when they're received on your balance sheet as a liability. And once it's approved for forgiveness, that liability is reclassified as capital. Now, why do I make this technical distinction? Because neither the liability or the later reclassification to capital, that financial activity is not reported on your statement of revenues and expenses. So the proceeds will not fall into the revenue category. Unlike Colleen, we were talking with earlier, those grant resources do come on as revenue. So I think you're in a safe zone and not at risk for being above that criteria just because you received previous monies from the PPP program.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lou. One final question. This question is from Kim. Do you think there'll be a round three of the stimulus packages for entrepreneurs and business owners?
I am hopeful, and I am mainly interested in ensuring that small business gets a sufficient runway to regroup. The sort of good news is the smaller, generally speaking, the more agile the business is. They're adaptable. Many of us were using online technology to facilitate our business because it represented a way to minimize cost. But by the same token, revenue has not been as stable. So I, for one, would be a proponent of reassessing the economic landscape after March 31st to evaluate where we are in the economy, and to the extent that there is a need, I would favor it. I mean, there was one, maybe this was 3 or 4 months ago, I read one study indicating that 40% of small businesses have been lost during this COVID era. Because small business provides over 50% of work for our labor force, I don't think that that is a loss we can absorb. So long and the short of it is, I want to hold out hope that if these statistics are still in the range of that 40% reduction in small businesses, that we will have another PPP appropriation.
All right, we'll keep an eye out for that. And Lou, I want to thank you for sharing your time, sharing your knowledge, and your experience with us. I know this was extremely valuable information. I got a lot out of this, and I can tell that the audience got a lot out of this as well.
Great.
Your information, was on the screen, and if anyone has any follow-up questions, they can definitely, Jack, can we put that back up? Thank you. You can definitely reach out to Lou. His number is at the bottom there, 877-640-6342. And Lou, your accounting firm does represent individuals in other states other than Maryland. Is that correct?
We're actually, Nigo, in 40 of the 50 states, and we have a significant client base in Pennsylvania. So that's true.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And if you have an opportunity, check Lou out on Sirius XM channel 126 on Urban View, Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. That's 9 to 11, I believe.
That's correct.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Lou, thank you again. I want to thank Mahogany, your daughter, for setting this up with you. Kim, thank you, and the Chamber for your participation and collaboration. Nancy, thank you. Denise Vicario, Jack, thank you all. Really learned a lot today, and stay tuned, because we'll be having another presentation in May 2021. So stay tuned for information on that. And I want to thank everyone for stopping by and doing this lunch and learn. So everyone go get some lunch. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Lou. And I'd also ask that if you have time, that you would visit us again and impart this information, because it was so timely. And I also want to say, he didn't mention, though, he has a family business. His daughter, Mahogany, is on here, is an attorney, and his son is an accountant, correct? Or CPA.
Correct. That's
and
right.
combined, this family is amazing that they've created this business. And so I do want to highlight next time on family businesses and all that too, because I think it's just inspirational to all of us. And I appreciate your time, and hope you will be a host of ours in some months to come, because we really need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate that.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right. Take care now.
Take care.